The studio was pristine, polished to a clinical shine, and flooded with cool white light that never cast a shadow. Rows of overhead panels glowed softly above the host's desk, and everything, the chairs, the backdrop, the floor, was designed to make the conversation seem casual, civil, controlled. It was the set of the Frontline Exchange, one of the most watched primetime political news segments in America, a place where narratives were sharpened like blades and headlines were made to bleed. Tonight's guest, however, didn't fit the mold. Elon Musk walked in just seconds before they went live. No entourage, no handler whispering last-minute prep in his ear. He wore a simple charcoal jacket, a plain black shirt, and a look in his eyes that hovered somewhere between intense curiosity and simmering defiance. The host, Kara Lister, offered a firm handshake, which Musk returned, though his attention had already moved beyond the formality. He scanned the set with the precision of an engineer, noting the position of every camera, the artificial placement of every coffee cup, every fake cue of normalcy. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, the or. Camera lights brightened, the jingle played, and the show was live. Kara Lister leaned forward, her posture confident but practiced. She'd interviewed presidents, generals, whistleblowers, CEOs. She prided herself on being unshakable, a master of the carefully loaded question, the rhetorical trap disguised as dialogue. Elon Musk, she began, her voice smooth as glass. Thank you for joining us tonight. You've been called many things: visionary, disruptor, billionaire, chaos agent, and lately, you've made headlines not for your rockets or AI models, but for your war against the media. So let me ask you directly, why the hostility? What's the endgame? Musk tilted his head slightly, the hint of a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Because the media's not broken. It's behaving exactly as it was designed to. She blinked. That's a bold claim. It's not bold, Musk replied. It's math. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk, gaze locked in. Media doesn't sell truth, it sells attention. And the cheapest form of attention is outrage. You know this. Everyone knows this. What they don't realize is how far that dynamic's been weaponized. Kara nodded slowly. But some would argue your own platforms, Twitter or X as it's now called, do the same thing. Amplify controversy, spread disinformation. Musk nodded. Yes. Which is why I bought it. To make the manipulation visible instead of buried behind legacy credibility. You think the New York Times doesn't run biased headlines? That networks don't cut clips to fit a narrative? He turned toward the nearest camera, as if speaking not to the host, but directly to the millions watching. You think you're getting facts, but you're getting angles, Kara interjected. But aren't you doing the same? Sharing memes, calling out journalists by name, reposting unverifiable claims? Some would say that's not transparency, it's harassment. Wrong, Musk said. Not loud, just certain. What I'm doing is showing you how it works. When I post something crude or sarcastic, it gets millions of views. Not because people care, but because you amplify it. Because the media turns it into content. Outrage becomes oxygen. He tapped the desk lightly. You don't report what matters. You report what performs. Kara smiled politely, but her jaw tightened just slightly. So what matters then, Mr. Musk? If you were sitting in this chair, what would you report? Musk didn't pause. I'd report that AI has passed the point of controllability in multiple open-source labs, that we're closer to artificial general intelligence than most people realize, that the energy grid is 2 weather events away from partial collapse in 4 states, that global food systems are more vulnerable than we think because no one's gamed out 3 simultaneous crop failures. But that's not sexy, right? That's not a trending hashtag. So we get stories about tweets, about which billionaire offended who. He leaned back. Distraction dressed as journalism. The control room, watching behind glass, suddenly buzzed, with tension. Producers stared at monitors. The teleprompter assistant hesitated. This wasn't the way the interview was supposed to go. But it wasn't off the rails. It was ahead of them. Kara shifted tactics. Let's get specific then. You've accused several major outlets of lying about your companies, your intentions, your actions. Can you give an example? Musk's smile vanished. His eyes sharpened. Do you want a list or a highlight reel? We've got time, she said, her tone still smooth, but her knuckles just barely white around the note cards. Musk nodded. Okay, let's start with 2020. Tesla was called a COVID superspreader because we didn't shut down a facility fast enough. But what didn't make the headline? The fact that we followed the exact same protocols as the other automakers, only they didn't have reporters camped outside their gates. Let's talk about Starlink. When we provided it to Ukraine, headlines called it a weapon. When we paused access to avoid escalation, the same outlets accused us of betrayal. So tell me, was it a weapon or wasn't it? Or how about when the Washington Post ran a headline that implied I fired employees for union organizing at Tesla? The truth? Performance issues documented for months. But they didn't include that because that doesn't get clicks, outrage does. He stopped, letting the silence breathe. Kara adjusted her mic. Those are serious accusations. No, Musk said flatly. Those are facts. What's serious is that the public still thinks you're referees. You're not. You're players, and you're losing. The studio didn't make a sound. Not the crew. Not the host. Not the audience watching from millions of homes who had tuned in for a debate and found themselves watching something closer to demolition. And Musk wasn't done. He let the silence settle like dust. Slow, invasive, undeniable. The kind of silence that didn't ask for permission. It claimed the space. Kara Lister straightened her posture, trying to regain control, but her composure had hairline fractures now. Elon Musk hadn't just answered her questions. He had turned them inside out, hollowed them, and handed them back to her like evidence of a deeper lie. The control room fed her updates in her earpiece. Viewership was skyrocketing. Comments were surging. Social platforms were fragmenting into chaos. She tried again. You speak about manipulation, but critics say you use your own platform to influence public perception. Some even call it a cult of personality. Are you suggesting your reach is somehow more pure? Musk's eyes narrowed, not with irritation, but with that quiet intensity that always preceded something dangerous. Something true. I'm not pure, he said plainly. I'm visible. Kara blinked. What does that mean? It means everything I say, every flawed, messy 3 a.m. post, every joke, every bad take, is out there. Public, criticized, dismantled. No editors, no layers, no gatekeepers deciding what parts of me you get to see. He tapped the desk again. The same measured rhythm. Can you say the same about your network, your newsroom, your funding? Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came. Elon leaned in just a fraction. Your viewers think this show is independent. They don't know your parent company has partnerships with weapons contractors, data brokers, and pharmaceutical giants. You report on industry while being funded by industry. You claim to ask hard questions, but you never ask the right ones. The crew flinched. One cameraman blinked rapidly, unsure whether to zoom tighter or pull back. You want to know why? I challenge the media, he continued, because I don't think you're evil. I think you're lazy. You stopped investigating truth the moment it became easier to repurpose press releases. You stopped challenging the system when the system started paying for your studio lights. Kara managed to speak, but her voice had lost some of its armor. So what? You think you're the last honest man in the room? Musk shook his head. No, I'm just the only one who's not pretending anymore. Her fingers flexed on her note cards. There were still 10 questions left on the script, none of which felt adequate now. None of which would matter. He wasn't finished. People aren't angry at the media because of me. They're angry because they feel lied to. You can only gaslight a population for so long before they start noticing the seams. You tell them inflation's under control while groceries double in price. You tell them the war's going well while body bags come home in silence. You tell them tech is the enemy, then cover stories using smartphones made by sweatshop labor and algorithms you barely understand. Kara's voice dropped. This isn't about facts anymore. This is about distrust. Exactly, he said. And you built it. Another silence. This one thick with implications no headline could spin fast enough. Kara glanced toward the producer's booth. They were frozen. No one dared cut the feed. They knew. Pulling away now would only confirm everything he'd just said. Musk sat back, in his chair like a man who had walked into someone else's game, and flipped the board without raising his voice. I'm not asking people to trust me, he added almost casually. I'm asking them to think for themselves. If that threatens your industry, maybe it's not me you should be worried about. The words hung there. Not as provocation. As conclusion. Kara swallowed. Her eyes flicked to the camera, then back to him. You realize what you've done here tonight? He nodded. Yes. You've declared war. Musk didn't smile. He didn't blink. No, he said. I've declared independence. The screen behind them flickered briefly, a glitch in the broadcast system, before stabilizing. But the image it carried, of a man calmly dismantling a media apparatus in real time, was already being clipped, downloaded, reposted, and replayed around the world. In that moment, he wasn't just a guest. He was the story, and no one could control it. Now, the moment went viral before the interview even ended. Musk's words had detonated across every platform simultaneously, echoing, warping, amplifying into hundreds of millions of screens within minutes. The clips were everywhere, but it was the silence between the words, the calmness of his delivery, that unnerved people most. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't shouted. He had just peeled the paint off the walls and done it with the steadiness of a man rearranging furniture. In the studio, Kara Lister's producers were in chaos behind the glass. Whispers became arguments, hands waved in the air, someone gestured toward the clock, signaling that they needed to pivot, to end, to somehow retake control of a segment that had turned into an open autopsy of their own credibility. But inside the set, time moved differently now. Kara adjusted in her chair, not out of habit but necessity. She had trained for years to control conversations, to lead the dance, to spin complexity into clarity. But Musk had done something she couldn't prepare for. He hadn't dodged the questions. He'd disassembled why they were being asked. She took a breath. Let's shift gears, she said carefully, the smile on her face professionally resurrected. Let's talk about your influence. When you post, markets move, governments react, people believe you. Whether it's about AI, free speech, or the future of civilization, you shape opinion. Doesn't that concern you? Elon's answer came without pause. Concern? No. Responsibility? Yes. She tilted her head slightly, inviting elaboration. I don't ask people to agree with me, he said. I put ideas into the world. Some are wrong, some are right. But they're all mine, and they're public. The real concern is people shaping narratives in the dark, think tanks, lobbying groups, shadow media consultants. They don't take accountability. They script your talking points and vanish before the fallout. He looked right at her. I'm here, on camera, taking the heat, Kara pressed. But don't you see how some of your followers take your words as gospel? How it fuels conspiracies? How people run wild with things you only meant half seriously? Musk leaned forward again, voice quiet but sharper now. People didn't start distrusting media because of my tweets. They started distrusting media because they remember. They remember how weapons of mass destruction were presented as fact, how economic crashes were blamed on the wrong people, how censorship was called curation. And now they see what happens when someone speaks outside the script. He gestured slightly toward the cameras. This moment, right now, they'll clip it, frame it, call it Elon loses it live on. Heir or billionaire melts down on journalism. Because that's what drives clicks. He turned to her slowly. But the people watching, they see it all, unfiltered, and they're not stupid. The control room had stopped giving direction. There was no longer anything to direct. This wasn't a segment anymore. It was something primal, something about truth, spoken in a room that had long forgotten what it looked like without polish. Kara leaned in, her last card on the table. You're a billionaire, the richest man on earth. Some people say this entire war on the media is just ego. That you hate what you can't control. Elon smiled faintly, not with amusement, but understanding. You think I'm trying to control the narrative? She nodded. I'm not, he said. I'm unplugging it. The room exhaled. No one spoke. The air had shifted again. He continued, voice calm. I didn't buy a social network to own speech. I bought it because people were being erased. Their ideas, their mistakes, their voices. You called it moderation. But it was silence. And that's worse than chaos. At least chaos is honest. Kara tried to interject, but he held up a hand gently, not commanding, but with the calm certainty of a man who had nothing left to prove. Let me ask you something, he said. If the media is so righteous, so objective, then why does it hate competition? She blinked. Why attack independent journalists? Why smear platforms that let users decide? Why mock subcultures instead of listening to them? He leaned back, hands folding in his lap. You don't fear misinformation. You fear irrelevance. That landed like a body hitting the floor, and in that moment, across living rooms, subways, offices, coffee shops, something profound happened. Not rage, not cheering, but a subtle recalibration. Millions of viewers suddenly saw what had been happening all along. It wasn't about whether Musk was right about everything. It was about what he was refusing to be quiet about, and he had just said it live, on air, on their stage, with their cameras rolling. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was a fault line, and everyone knew. The aftershocks were still coming. The fourth segment was supposed to be the wind down, a change in tempo, a return to lighter territory, maybe even a few questions about Mars, electric trucks, or brain chips. But there was no going back. The temperature in the studio had changed. Something irreversible had taken place, and everyone, especially Kara Lister, knew it. She glanced at her notes again, but they felt irrelevant now. The interview had broken from its outline like a spacecraft punching through the atmosphere. No going back, only up or out or through. Her voice came quieter this time. You've made your position clear, she said. You believe the media is failing the public. But where does that leave the people who rely on it? For truth, for accountability, for some version of shared reality? Musk looked at her and, for a moment, the intensity in his eyes softened, not because he was backing down, but because the question for once wasn't barbed. It was real. It leaves them where every civilization eventually ends up, he said, at the edge of illusion. You can't outsource your thinking forever. There comes a point where you either wake up or you get led off a cliff. Kara nodded, slowly. So what's the alternative? Twitter threads and chaos? Everyone in their own bubble of truth? Musk shook his head. No. The alternative is friction, debate, noise, freedom. He sat forward, palms flat on the desk now. Yes, it's messy. Yes, people say crazy things. But when you silence the noise, you silence the signal too. We've built a culture that's terrified of discomfort, and that's dangerous, because truth doesn't feel like comfort. It feels like interruption. He paused. You think I love being the center of this? That I enjoy being painted as unstable, egotistical, dangerous? No. But I'd rather be hated for what I say than loved, for what I allow to be hidden. In the control room, the silence was now tension-wired. Producers hovered over cut buttons, unsure if they were about to be celebrated or sued. Legal advisors stood near screens. One of them whispered, "If we pull the feed now, we confirm everything he's saying." And so the feed stayed live. Musk continued, now speaking less to Kara and more to the audience, the invisible millions who had, until this moment, never seen someone use live television not as a platform, but as a mirror. Do you know how many journalists DM me off the record? He asked. How many of them agree with what I say, but can't tweet it because of editorial lines? Because of corporate politics? Because it'll get them blacklisted? That's not free press. That's controlled narrative. You don't have a watchdog. You have a PR firm with a press pass. Kara swallowed. You're saying journalism is dead. I'm saying real journalism is being strangled, Musk said, by profit incentives, by cowardice, by institutions that demand obedience over curiosity. The problem isn't the existence of false narratives, it's that the truth has no home anymore. That landed. Heavy. He glanced at the camera again. People are waking up, and when they do, they're not going to turn to polished anchors with scripted monologues. They're going to turn to people who bleed when they speak, who risk something by telling the truth. Kara looked down at her. Notes. There was a question highlighted in red, one she had been saving, one that weeks ago had felt like the ace up her sleeve. She looked back up. Do you think you're above the truth, Mr. Musk? He didn't hesitate. No. Another pause. I think I'm underneath more lies than most. And then he leaned in. But I'm still digging. And when I find daylight, I won't apologize. For it. That was the moment. Not the confrontation. Not the outrage. That. The quiet certainty of a man who had endured mockery, fury, lawsuits, government threats, boycotts, and still came back, not to burn the system down, but to expose what it had become. In the seconds that followed, something happened across the globe. Comments stopped trolling and started listening. People who had sworn off Musk began to reevaluate, not because they liked him, but because they saw what he was confronting, and the most loyal defenders of the mainstream media? They started blinking, because they felt it too. That tiny sliver of doubt that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a narcissistic meltdown. Maybe it was a reckoning. And Elon Musk wasn't trying to win. He was trying to warn, and now that he had, the silence he left in his wake wasn't peaceful. It was a silence filled with reckoning, with questions no Chiron could frame, and still, he wasn't finished. The fifth segment began without introduction. No graphics, no transition music, no upbeat reset. Just an unbroken continuation, because the air in the studio was too thick, too charged, to pretend anything had ended. The producer's voice in Kara's earpiece had gone quiet. There were no more prompts, no more backup questions, no commercial breaks suggested. It was as if even the network had surrendered to the gravity of the moment. Kara sat still for a second, shoulders lowered, face composed but tired. Not from hostility, from awareness. She was no longer trying to beat Elon Musk at the game, she was trying to understand the rules he had exposed. You've said a lot tonight that's going to shake people, she began carefully. You've called out the media, the institutions, the entire framework of information. But let me ask you this. She leaned in, voice barely above a murmur. What if the people aren't ready for this kind of chaos? Musk looked at her like she'd just asked the most important question of the night. They're not, he said plainly. But that doesn't matter, because chaos isn't coming, it's already here. He gestured gently toward the space around them. Your viewers already live in a fractured world. Every headline contradicts the last. Every expert has a counter-expert. Every truth comes with a loophole. People aren't just confused, they're disoriented. And when they turn to the media for guidance, they don't get clarity. They get performance. He paused, folding his hands. You want to know what happens when people realize the institutions they trusted aren't just flawed, but complicit? They don't riot. They don't scream. They disconnect. They stop voting. They stop watching. They stop believing anything. A heaviness settled in the room. That's what's dangerous, he said. Not me, not X, not the crazy tweets or rogue podcasts or whistleblowers with encrypted files. The real threat is when the public looks at everything, every politician, every anchor, every expert, and says, none of you are real. Kara's throat tightened. She knew exactly what he meant. She'd seen the analytics herself. Viewership slowly eroding, trust polls plummeting, younger audiences watching TikToks over news briefings, even her own friends asking, yeah, but who really owns your network? She couldn't answer without swallowing the same doubt Elon was now voicing out loud. So what's the solution? She asked, almost whispering. If you're not here to destroy, then what are you here to do? Musk's expression didn't soften, but his voice did. Remind people they're not crazy. He looked to the camera again, not the lens, but the audience beyond it. Not the haters, not the loyalists, the skeptics. The people stuck in the middle. You're not crazy for noticing the headlines don't match your instincts. You're not crazy for sensing that the people telling you what's true don't live in the same world you do. You're not crazy for questioning the perfectly packaged stories they feed you night after night. He looked back at Kara. Truth doesn't need choreography. It doesn't need makeup or sponsorships. It just needs a place to exist. Kara exhaled, her eyes briefly glancing to the floor. When she looked up again, her voice was softer. Do you still believe in journalism? I believe in truth tellers, Elon said, whatever label they wear. He glanced to the studio lights above. I believe in people willing to get fired for what's right, people who publish when they're told to delete, people who ask questions no one else dares to ask, even if it costs them their seat at the table. Another beat. Sometimes those people are journalists, sometimes they're not, but they're out there, and we need them now more than ever. The control room director slowly stepped forward toward the window, staring into the studio. Everyone on the crew felt the shift. This was no longer an interview. It was a turning point. They'd filmed hundreds of episodes here, but never one like this. Never one where the guest had taken the scalpel and performed a live dissection of the entire institution, calmly, eloquently, and without apology. Kara Lister looked at the clock. Time was running out. She had one question left. Are you afraid? She asked. Musk looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, every day. The admission hung there. But fear isn't the problem, he added. The problem is pretending. You're not afraid while doing nothing. He leaned back, voice steady. I'd rather build scared than wait safe. Silence again, and in that silence, a collective realization. Elon Musk had not burned down the media tonight. He had simply pulled the walls apart to let in light. Harsh light. Unfiltered light. The kind that exposes every wrinkle, every crack, every inconsistency, and dares you to keep filming anyway. And still, he wasn't finished. The clock had struck the end of the hour, but no one moved. Not the host, not the guest, not the crew holding their breath behind the glass. What had started as an interview had become a rupture, one of those rare cultural fractures people remember, not because of how loud it was, but because of how quietly irreversible it felt. Kara Lister looked directly at Elon Musk, her cards discarded, her outline long abandoned. This is going to be replayed 1,000 times, she said softly. Clipped, dissected, spun into whatever people want it to be. I know, Musk replied. And you're okay with that? He didn't even blink. I'm counting on it. The camera lights dimmed slightly. The live indicator flickered once, then faded. The feed cut to commercial, but the real show had already happened. Off-script, unscripted, unforgettable. The control room, the producers sat in stunned silence. One of them stood with a headset in hand, as if trying to decide whether to speak or disappear. Another whispered, We just lost control of our own platform. But outside the building, something much larger had already begun. Within 15 minutes, the entire interview was clipped and uploaded, not by the network, but by viewers. Every major platform was lit up with bold titles. Musk Unfiltered. The night the media got called out. Live TV will never be the same again. You fail quiet, I fail loud. And the comment sections weren't angry. They weren't tribal. They weren't divided. They were reflective. I don't like the guy, but he just said what we've all been thinking. That wasn't an interview. That was a reckoning. I feel seen. For the first time in years, I feel seen. In newsrooms across the country, emails began to fly. Editors asking teams to brace for the fallout. Some wanted damage control. Some wanted retaliation. Some just wanted to understand how they lost the story on their own turf. At a rival network, a producer watched the replay and muttered, We've been outpaced, outthought, outgunned. And no one disagreed, because Musk hadn't just exposed media bias or hypocrisy or clickbait. He had exposed the architecture of trust, how flimsy it had become, how automated, how performative. He hadn't destroyed journalism. He dared it to evolve or die. At SpaceX headquarters, Elon walked through a quiet hallway alone. His phone was buzzing, but he didn't answer. His team watched him from a distance, not because they feared him, but because they understood something had shifted. Their boss wasn't just an engineer anymore. Tonight, he'd become a trigger point for an entire system asking itself what it really stood on. A young intern looked up from her laptop. "Sir, should we respond to the headlines?" Musk shook his head. "Let them talk." He walked into a dark room where blueprints lined the walls. Starship engines, Neuralink nodes, power cells, Mars colony layouts, because tomorrow, he'd go. Back to building, that was the difference. They would argue. He would launch. Meanwhile, back at the network, Kara Lister sat alone in her dressing room, makeup half removed, face pale in the mirror. She stared at herself, not as an anchor, not as a performer, but as a participant in something that had exposed her own blind spots. Her phone rang. She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because deep down, she knew the truth. Elon Musk hadn't ended the conversation. He had begun it, and the echo of his voice, calm, clear, unblinking, would live longer than any broadcast. Truth doesn't need choreography. It just needs a place to exist. And now it finally had one. He didn't burn the studio. He opened the door, and the world was walking through it.